Welcome to Weekend Class 3. Really did enjoy the times we've spent together thus far. This is one we really begin to see the essence of what the relationship of the second week was to what we're trying to do. The nature of change, and you looked at several good people on change, has a rather significant impact on policy formation. So what you have first in week 3 is something from Policy Institute at Ramapo University in New Jersey. Why do I like Ramapo? Well, mainly because I met them through a former Maryland administrator who left to become director of one of the divisions of higher ed for the state of New Jersey. And he said that the quality of work they do there is very good. And I think that informal evaluation, some of us may call it, I don't know, Dr. Spicer is off touring the world, and she would probably know it, as I do, as formative assessment or evaluation. Some people call it, as they do there, they call it informal. But they're both important. They're ongoing. They're process-oriented. The final product orientation comes later for things like the annual review, the visits with wherever you are in the process of accreditation. That's where all that policy work gets done. So please take a careful look at that material. You now understand also, after Class 2 and with the 2 on Class 3, and one that I'll give you when you get there, why I didn't choose to use a textbook. It struck me that the readings we're doing, well, first of all, they're more focused. I don't think it's possible to write a good textbook. I have 2, and I used one once 3 years ago, and I found that the students hated it, and it cost too much money. So as far as I'm concerned, by doing it this way, it saves you a little money, and you get the state of the art. More importantly, you also get the content material that is state of the art. You meet some people you need to meet. In your policy analysis first one, you're going to meet a couple groups that you need to know. There's a National Policy Institute, and there's also the National Council for Higher Education Management Systems. All of these things are really core to our profession. You will use these not just in policy, you'll use them in budget, you'll use them in assessment. These are people whose work is very, very well known. And the names you begin to recognize, and you see a whole raft of them on that first slightly longer reading. These are people who you will see all over the country, in fact, some say all over the world, when they're working with the policy formation issue. I happen to like good policy, good practices, because it is very useful. It gives you a tool you could take with you and use almost immediately. So it is precise, far more precise than anything you would find in a textbook, excuse me. The other thing that's interesting, and that's your second reading, the Aspen Institute has a headquarters in Boulder, Colorado, but they also have an operational unit in D.C. I did not know anything about them until I joined the staff at Morgan. And it turns out that they work very, very closely with Morgan State. And they're producing some pretty good material. What you saw there, the one that you got, is one of about 8 white papers. That's a very, very common terminology that's used when you get a group of people who are looking at a particular issue and trying to look at it through a variety of lenses. And I think you'll find that that's very, very useful in the way we go about policy. You will note they make reference a couple of times in the first one to the Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, to the Knight Foundation. Now, we're going to look at some of the other Knight Foundation material before the class ends, because they were the one that really decided we needed to rethink the way we did policy work. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in class. I think if you skim it, if you look at the executive summary, and if you look at the 6 units that they talk about. Now all of these units have one common thread, and that thread is something called transparency. It's one of the things that we in education were accused of not doing as well as we might. Being as clear and open and accessible to our stakeholders, whether they're our internal clients, our external providers, or just people who have an interest in or need to know what we do. We are a public entity. Gary asked that question in the first class, and I thought it was probably one of the most cogent questions that you're going to see. Just exactly what do we mean when we say public? Civic Culture, the Alma Verba book that we mentioned briefly, goes about trying to answer that question. And it's a tough question to answer, particularly when you're looking at 5 national cultures, as they did. But I think it's a very worthy read. One of the things I do recommend, please make a note of the URL for that particular paper, only because at some point in another course, I don't think in this course, unless something relates directly to what you are currently going to do your final project and report on, would you use those other white papers? But believe me, they will be helpful. I promise you that. Okay. One of the other things that I think is important is one of the research units that they quote from regularly. The person I would really like you to take a look at is a Dr. Can't read my own writing. A Dr. Turner Lee. She's got a strong background. It's listed. Please read it. Also, that organization, the one she represents, works very, very closely with a number of the HBCUs. Okay. One of the things I need to have from you by the end of this class, ideally it would be helpful if I could have it before, but that doesn't matter. If I get it at the end, that's fine, so I can get you feedback, is what you plan to do your overall project on. I'd ask you for a very short précis. I sent you some material on the concept of the précis so that you can begin to think about what it is. And again, I'm just going to reprise that very, very briefly. A précis is an annotated summary. So you're going to look at the 3 or 4 or 5 things. Go back to that very first long handout I gave you and decide which aspects or elements of that would fit into what you want to do. Undeniably, my friend at Florida Atlantic uses that to cover a whole plethora of assignments in several courses. And all we want to do is use it for this one overview course. So take a look at the ones you're going to use. Start to build your components, your concepts if you prefer. And then what we will do is work with them, and I'll give you feedback on what's going on. Now, the other thing I want to say, and I meant to say it earlier before I was interrupted, when you do this kind of where we do it, if you know anybody, they just don't, waving your hands at them doesn't seem to help. One of the nice things, and I do encourage you to use it, is the NCHEMS reading. NCHEMS is a very interesting organization, Higher Education Management Systems. And if you put them into the, you put in a Google search for NCHEMS, just do NCHEMS or just do nchms.org. You're going to find a pretty good sized website. The one you're most interested in, of course, is the one that's called publications, or yeah, that's what it is. So to make a long story short, you can go through their entire list. They go quite a way back. If you're doing any kind of research that touches on the history of budgeting, the history of assessment, the history of policy formation, some of the most powerful stuff that's been written is written by the people that work out there in Boulder. Again, both of those places are located in Boulder, Colorado. So to make a long story short, you're going to get electronic, which is great. I mean, that's the stuff you can get right off the thing. Also, if you're doing any real intense work, they do publish in hard copy stuff that you can't get free. But their prices are, believe me, compared to some of the stuff I've seen, like the MIT material or the Harvard material, or even on my little shirt here for Columbia, some of the stuff from Columbia is incredibly expensive. This stuff is not. So my suggestion is look at that. Beyond that, I think we're pretty well ready. Anytime now, remember, you have 3 more of the short assignments. You've had feedback from me on the first one. What I'd like you to do is don't let them all come in at the end. That's not fair to you. They're short, so that doesn't bother me terribly. But it would be nice if you could have systematic feedback as you're going through the course. So with all this sort of thing, I think we've pretty well covered the waterfront for today. I will see you next Monday afternoon.